Find a local passive house. Walk through it. It's like watching black and white TV versus HD. When I'm in a passive house, guys, I know I'm in a passive house. I could put my hand on center glass, put my hand on the window frame, and put my hand on center opaque, and the temperature is the same. I sit in front of it and I'm watching, and this is a main thoroughfare building, right? And we're sitting there and I'm inside the passive house in this big window, and a bus comes roaring by. I didn't hear a thing, right? You have to experience it. There's no airflow coming over your shoulders. You never feel that, right? You don't hear the air kicking on and kicking off. If you turn the heat off in a passive house, it takes 2 weeks to move 2 degrees, right?
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Reimagine Edit, a special series of the Passive House podcast. I'm Zack Semke, director of Passive House Accelerator and host of the Reimagine Buildings Collective, and thanks for tuning in. I'm recording this in late January 2026, and I have to say it's been an intense year here in the US and around the world. I hope you and yours are navigating it well and faring okay. I, for one, have been feeling really grateful to be part of this community of people working to help create a future of health and resilience amidst it all. So I just want to say thank you. The Reimagine Edit podcast series shares curated insights from conversations happening inside the Reimagine Buildings Collective, our membership community for climate-conscious builders, designers, and changemakers. Reimagine Buildings is a practitioner space where we support one another, work through real challenges, and build the skills and the confidence and the relationships needed to deliver better buildings in a rapidly changing world. In this episode 15, we'll hear from Lindsay Schack, Matt Brill, Irwin, Craig Stevenson, and Michael Ingui. In this first clip, we'll hear from Lindsay Schack of Love Shack Architecture as she shares how she discovered Passive House. This is from Lindsay's Reimagined Design interview with Michael Ingui.
I just wanted to get to a point where I could make a living doing the work. And so I took on a couple of very small local projects for friends. And then the Boys and Girls Club in Eastern Montana in Sydney, where I'm from, reached out and said, okay, we want to build a new building, but we need an architect. And it was a pretty challenging climate, honestly, to go back and work in because they knew me as like a high school student that did sports and stuff. So I had to sort of also retrain and sort of reapproach. So I brought MSU's Community Design Center to Sydney and put some grad students in there to help them work through what they needed. And ultimately became the kind of project that it sort of dawned on me like, oh, I think this is the kind of project that people can build a firm on where there's enough work there and enough of an effort that you can start to employ more than just yourself, right? So I was up very late one night researching wall assemblies that would be healthy and affordable and also high performance in a cold climate for these kids. And that is when I found Passive House. And it was, we've talked about it, Michael, like I feel like this education path on Passive House is really one way. Like I at least have never experienced anybody who's spent time learning about it and said, that's not for me. That's lame. I don't think that's interesting or useful in any way. They might say it's too hard and they're not interested in going that far, but few people sort of just blow it off. And so I decided I wanted to learn more about it. And actually I went down and did a training in San Francisco. That's Kurt and I were in the same class. And then I came back to Montana fully expecting, all right, now they're going to beat down my door with Passive House contracts. And that wasn't how it worked out.
No, never is.
And, there were several years of us educating, teaching, talking to clients, talking to contractors, not really getting anywhere. Until we finally got a client who did come to us and say, I want this to be the outcome. And that did change things for us. But that was also after we had already started working on builder trainings, because we had several projects start out with people saying, I like this thing you're talking about, Lindsay, Passive House, or I know about it out there in the world. And I believe you that you can do it. But once a contractor would come on the team and the contractor would go, oh, we don't have to do this. This is overkill. I know how to build a house. Just let me build a house. It was a really hard circumstance to put all that effort in and then ultimately have the clients kind of talked out of it. And that's when we started doing the builder trainings. I thought that I could educate and inspire and sort of, do the work needed to get everybody pulling in the same direction and understanding it. But, construction is a very different business than architecture.
Mhm.
And those builders needed the benefit of training, just like I needed the benefit of training.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't,
And
my idea. It's like they are also bringing their knowledge to the job site, and they are also participating in it fully with the responsibility it requires. And that changed everything, honestly. And I do think it's a weird thing for architects to be, not weird, but just not normal thing for architects to be sponsoring builder trainings. And I am
Mhm.
not teaching them. Just want to be real clear about that. I'm not teaching them.
Mhm.
Enrico is teaching them and his team, right?
Mhm.
But ultimately they get the benefit of the same knowledge I do. And then we go, oh, okay, cool. We both know how to do this thing. Now we can partner and go build this building together. And that's what sort of turned that over for us, of being successful in finishing projects that were built to the standard.
That's fantastic. It feels like that's something that others in communities that are having a hard time doing it they could do that.
Yeah. And it was definitely a gamble, the first one that we did. Like
Mhm.
I understood that I was going to spend my social capital with these contractors to get them to spend
I get it.
money and go
Yes.
to us for 5 days of class in a classroom in May in
Yeah.
Montana when they needed
Yeah.
to be out digging holes,
Yeah.
right? And if they didn't get good stuff out of this training, like, it was going to be bad for me.
Mhm.
But it didn't work out that way. It worked out where they were like, that was what worthwhile. I'm so glad I took that training. I would like to
Mhm.
be part of your next project. And I will say that for all custom homes that are trying to hit a performance standard, we sort of
Mhm.
say, all right, if we're going to certify, our builder also has to be trained. That's just a non-negotiable.
Next up, Fabrizio, a Reimagine Buildings member or Reimaginer, asks Matt Brill of Bow and Build about how to raise the bar with collaborators. This comes from Matt's Ask Me Anything Friday appearance in the collective.
We're doing quite exactly the same kind of education stuff with architect here in Quebec, and I think we have the same kind of reality. Um, we have been involved in many kind of project. We received the plan and we're looking at the plan and we're saying, wow, there's many stuff that could be uh, designed better. My question is, what is your approach when you come in an architect firm and you say, you guys are good firm. Your design are pretty good, but we can just do better. What is your approach to bring the bar higher, I guess?
Yeah, good question. So there are two things we focus on. One is just educate, make sure they're aware. So some architects aren't even really, maybe they're aware of passive house or high performance, but don't really know what that means. So I think that's fundamental. Baseline is just sharing that knowledge and making sure we're all on the same page. And then the other two things that we focus on, and it sounds like you might be able to do some of this given your existing work. The first one is talking through the cost factors in building better. And what we have a presentation we share either with architects or their clients, because a lot of times the clients will ask the same question, is how much more is it going to cost? And the reality is that in our budget, we have like 125 line items in our detailed budget. And there's really 6 items that get changed. So when you think about the home, the things the levers you have to pull are small relative to the overall project. So every project needs a roof, they need a floor, they'll need some form of a wall, question of how good that wall is, and they need tile and all those things. So I think that's like a barrier to entry is they just hear more materials and therefore more costs, and maybe they're afraid to present that to their clients. So I think it's just educating them about that the cost delta does not have to be, it isn't significant because not everything is changing about the house. There's only a small portion that's changing. And this is a harder sell, but I think it is something to be transparent about there is a way to have a design and make it high performance and have it be the cost the same if the client's willing to work with a lower allowance for tile and fixtures. Like I think that math can work. Not every client wants to maybe have a cheaper or less expensive tile or plumbing fixture, but if they're open to that, I would argue you can offset any of the additional costs. And then, my personal opinion is that you're going to derive far more value from a comfortable, clean home than you are a more expensive tile or plumbing fixture. And so those are just different avenues to look at the costs. Because at the end of the day, money is important to all these, everyone has a budget. So I think that's the second thing. And then the third thing is just helping them to demystify the details that might have to change in their drawings. And I think some architects maybe they don't know what has to change, or B, they're maybe a little concerned with the time or money that they'll have to do to, update their library. Because I think, to my knowledge, most architects have, their window library, and they might tweak something slightly based upon a certain project, but largely it's a library of drawings that they don't have to spend time or money to update for every single project. So we help the architects to talk about, and redline their drawings of what needs to be updated, at a detailed level. And then I talked about this I think I talked about this at the Passive House Accelerator Live, but we also created 3D graphics of all those key details that need to change. And they're generic enough that they'll apply to any project. But detailed enough to give the architect a sense for, like, okay, I get it now. It's not, because, some of these things are complex to detail and to design. And so seeing it in like an isometric or 3D view can really help. And I can share the link in the chat. We have all that, free for anyone to use, but you could take that and advance it further for your own uses. But I think that's kind of the third component, is like, when the rubber meets the road, they still have to design this house, and making sure they feel confident they can do that, and not hesitant about maybe, how the waterproofing is going to work around, the windows and some of those details that I think a lot of architects are concerned with, making sure they're designed right so that they get built and the house remains durable.
Now we return to Lindsay Schack's conversation with Michael Ingui. Here, they explore how healthy building goals can emerge when you engage with clients in a skillful way.
It sounds like you're always questioning your system and your process.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And yeah, do you do that just kind of organically? Are you doing it like project by project? Like,
Well,
it's got to be difficult to, like, not do what's comfortable that works.
I mean, I think so range of projects, like I will say that we tell all of our clients in introductory meetings that we prioritize projects with performance goals.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, well, some of them say, what's a performance goal? And I'm like, well, let's talk about your performance goals, because you have them, you just don't call them that.
Mm-hmm.
However, if a client is, say, very motivated only by aesthetics,
Mm-hmm.
like, I'll say, like, I think I had a client once that was like, just make it cool. I want it cool. I want it cool. And it's like, well, that is a subjective word, and I don't operate very well in super subjective environments. I do
Yes.
like rules.
Great.
Or at least, let's make them up ourselves, but at least we've got some boundaries on what we're trying to do. And I just say, like, there's so many people that will help a person design something that is just design focused. Like, if you don't appreciate what we can do on the building science side, I just don't think we're a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that, like, what's within their budget, within their schedule, within their desires, and how far can we push it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain ideals out there, but I think we're always trying to get clients to define and see value in indoor air quality, fire resiliency, and speak about it in those terms, because that's what it actually is. Okay, like, I'm not trying to, I don't want anyone to pat me on the back, and I'm not looking for a morality high ground. It's literally better building science and better space for humans, and saves money. And that is a much more effective way, I think, for us to understand, where we're serving our best clients, and where we get them to sort of be more intentional about the kind of home they want to build. And I feel like I strayed away from your question a little bit there, but
no, but I mean, it didn't, because I feel like you're bringing up a good point, because I think then the client is in that conversation with you. So as you're deciding, foam or straw bale, or foam or wood fiber, and you're starting to think about it, your clients, they're in it a little bit, because, as you say, everyone has a performance requirement. No matter what. I mean, and the question is, how far do you want to go? But then it's the opening to a larger conversation that then gets them interested. I also agree with you that the clients, at least that are coming to me, and I do mostly high-end residential, so take it with a grain of salt, but they are all already infatuated with trying to live as healthy a lifestyle as they can.
of course.
And they didn't know they could have that in their own home. So
Yeah, and
once they do, like all of a sudden,
like when they realize they don't have to compromise,
yeah.
right? It's just
Mhm.
it's more of it's a system, not necessarily like a tax bracket you have to be into, I think, to get this
Yes.
healthy
Yes.
space. And like we have in part of the retrofit series, and speaking with my colleague Andrea, like I love her project because it's such a more approachable retrofit experience, done in phases and done in a way where they
Mhm.
didn't have to move out of their home.
Mhm.
And ultimately they get this better space. And I do think clients are definitely more aware of, or respond more when we talk about values in your home. We talk about fire resiliency and being able to survive a smoke event. Like, your neighborhood isn't on fire,
Mhm.
but there's a fire a mile away and you might get smoke damage in your home. And that is more real to people than it was a few years ago. So just for all of us on the call, like, just finding messages for clients that help them understand the values, because so much of what Passive House is kind of a little bit intangible, and it's not so super glamorous.
Mhm.
So people don't really know what they're missing out on, especially if they've never been in a Passive House. And we've talked about that many times, but
Mhm.
communicating that way, I think, has been helpful for us to get through to clients on setting their goals. And then
Mhm.
typically too, I always think it's really interesting that especially all of our early Passive House clients were all like scientists and or doctors and or just people
Mhm.
that had like a high appreciation for the technical or sort of
Mhm.
precision maybe.
Mhm.
And so then they wanted that in their homes. And I just don't think that's everybody. I think we've got to find ways to make this just
Yeah.
more relatable and more just like about being comfortable and being able to walk
Mhm.
around in your bare feet and in your pajamas if you want to in the
Yeah.
winter, right?
Mhm.
Like being cool in the summertime if it's hot,
Mhm.
right? And this is all just super relatable stuff. And it doesn't have to feel like it's so complex to deliver that to your client.
Here we pivot to Michael Ingui's Reimagine Design interview with Graham Irwin of Essential Habitat Architecture. Michael asks Graham about his approach to fire resilience in his work.
The one thing I really want to make sure we get to, which will be my next question, is just designing for fire readiness. Only because I know it's something that you've really worked on. I know you've been part of the cohort. I know you've been thinking about it for quite some time. I don't know where you want to start with that question,
Sure.
but maybe
Yeah.
just talk about it a bit, because I do think it would be great to hear about that.
I've been working on that for a long time.
Yeah.
Before even like we were talking, I did some designs for a fire rebuild up near me in 2015. And I went through, remember that whole thing with that viral quote unquote passive house, right? Which, the
Mhm.
architect didn't call it. I don't know who called that a passive house. Someone I know called it like the best piece of false advertising for passive building they'd ever seen, right? But, and people are trying to find all these things about it that are inherently like, what about passive building is inherently fire resistant? And
Yep.
there may be some things, but I would say that's kind of a fairly weak argument. And so
Mhm.
anyway, I started thinking about it and I came up with this framework that I use, which is, again, it's in the theme of passive building or passive house, because we're really looking beyond the minimum, right? And we're looking at what value, like how can we optimize this? I'm not saying make it ridiculous, but like how can we optimize what we're doing? Sometimes it's not that much of a difference in approach that has a huge difference in outcome. So anyway, I came up with this framework of living through wildfire, living with wildfire, and living well as the kind of stages of optimization. And so I'd say like the living through is the most immediate thing that people are concentrating on, like WUI code requirements. Like
Mhm.
I'm not downplaying them. They're vital, right? That's life and building safety. So you got to deal with all that stuff. There are some things that we do, like unvented assemblies, I think,
Mhm.
very intelligent, having all the window panes tempered, that kind of stuff, but, that in and of itself, if you just take the code minimum requirements of that, you lose a lot. And so
Yeah, I get that.
I look at living with wildfire being a broader experience, right? Like very few people, too many, but very few people are going to live through wildfires.
Mhm.
But nearly everyone is living with wildfires. And by that, I mean dealing with wildfire smoke and grid outages. right?
Yeah.
That's New York, right? You guys had trees
Yeah.
from
And then
Quebec
the effects of
that shifted in, right? I mean, like it's all
Yeah.
over. So it's like
Yeah.
you got to do that if you're in a wildfire zone, right? You've got to do those requirements. But can you also look a little bit beyond that and say, and like one example I use is a wall, right? A wall with one option with WUI is if you don't have ignition resistant siding, you can put a 5/8 gyp on the outside of your wall, like make a 1 hour fire rated wall. Okay, you could do that, but you can also use rock wool insulation instead of the gyp board, right? And you can do air sealing, right? And so you do air sealing and you put some exterior insulation on it. Now you got a building. Well, hey, if I'm dealing with wildfire smoke, I can filter that. I can have a ventilation system. I can deal with that. I mean, and even kind of back to the living through, there are a lot of houses that don't burn down in wildfire. We're seeing this all the time. They're so polluted inside from toxic smoke and soot that they're really a total write-off anyway. So you want to control, I mean, that's an argument for air tightness as an example.
Yeah.
And then, and then kind of my third thing is, well, 1.5 inches of rock will give you a 1 hour fire thing, but that's still prescriptive, right? Maybe you ought to do something like here's a shocker, passive building or passive house, right? And actually optimize that insulation. And maybe it's only 2 inches. I don't know what it is, but it's not just an arbitrary number, like arbitrary from a performance standpoint, but you optimize this whole building. And now you have what we all talk about, right? Building with clean air. It's resilient through grid outages. You can power it from battery and solar way easier than you could with, a typical building. And I want to circle back on one thing, because I've got a project, a retrofit we did in Sunnyvale, and the clients didn't put their solar on for a while. They wanted to, he's really into like zeroing his bill, but he didn't want to put his solar on until he had a year's worth of utility, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, got back to me, gave me his utility bills, right? And this is about not huge, but a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, all electric house. They have 2 EVs that they charge. They have an 8.5 kilowatt PV system, which isn't gigantic. And their biggest bill of the year, like January through March, was $20 a month.
That's crazy.
And then April was -67.
That's funny.
And the reason I bring that up, I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, this really works. This is it. But again, it's not helping.
Why isn't everybody doing it?
Right. It's not helping dissuade me from being passionate about it. But I was really like, I looked down, I'm like, holy good God, this actually does what it's supposed to do.
Next up, we hear from Matt Brill again, as he shares the #1 reason to do Passive House.
The reason to do Passive House and to be an airtight is 100% so that you can then control the indoor air quality on your terms. So whether that's the pollutants in the air, because you're bringing in all of your air through filters, through your ERV system, controlling humidity, and controlling the heating and cooling, and the tangible benefits for the client on the heating and cooling side is their system's going to have to run less, and so you don't have the environmental pollution of just noise. Because when a heating and cooling system runs, even if it's a super nice efficient system, there's audible noise that it's a pleasant sound, but it might be nice to not have it as much. So that's how we kind of sell. Because they're inherently related, and that's kind of what we talked about on my Passive House Accelerator, is those two key, the air tightness and the heating and cooling and ventilation systems are so interlinked. And that by going to a more airtight home, it enables you to achieve some of those goals that we share with our clients about just a better indoor air quality environment under your terms. Whatever you might like it cooler, you might like it warmer, whatever you like, you can control that. And yeah, the other thing to add to that, which may be part of your question, is cost. The one challenge with a single family home, whether retrofit or new, is that you don't achieve as much cost savings on the heating and cooling side as you would on like a 4-unit building or something larger, where you can then share some of that equipment and divide that cost over more units. So that's one thing that's I would say is broadly generalizing is not as much, you hear like, oh, you can downsize your equipment. The problem is the equipment manufacturers only make equipment so small that you can only downsize it so much. And the real costs, on the HVAC side, the equipment is, even if you got a super small unit, there's still going to be a cost for that. So there's a floor in your equipment pricing, and then you have the labor as the labor. So you don't save as much there. But one thing we do, and I think this is to your first question that you can leverage, is yeah, you might be spending a little bit more than if we did a normal house or a code built house, but you are getting more as a homeowner. If your neighbor has the same house as you, but you have a passive house and you have an ERV and it's airtight and you're not having all these drafts, it's hard to quantify that, but that is a different product that they are purchasing. And so it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's more, but you're getting more for your money.
Now let's hear from Craig Stevenson of the Oros Group during his AMA Friday session in the collective. Here, Craig lays out the real dollars and cents value of retrofitting to Passive House standards, especially in larger buildings.
I hear building owners describing buildings that they call deferred assets or stranded assets, and telling me my HVAC is broken, I can't bring a tenant into the space, and my windows are leaking, and they describe all these different conditions and they call it a stranded asset. When you look at that holistically and you transform that stranded asset into a passive house interfit or revive strategy, then you do the analysis on the value from that, and you're going to see a massive number. Let me give you a quick example, guys. I promise this will take 1 second. So we did a project, and I have these open because I didn't know where this was going to kind of go today. This is a building in Boston, right? 500,000 square foot, 4 stories. They called us because they're facing a BERDO fine. That's the building performance standards. Their RTUs are basically all at life cycle. This part of the building was vacant. All the windows leak, right? Every trigger you could possibly imagine. They called us and said, we're facing a fine. We don't know how much of a fine we're facing, but we're facing a fine and we don't know what the building's doing. Can you help us? Sure. So we went up there and we modeled this, and these are going to be consistent with the Wednesday things, right? If you go to a passive house on that building, you're going to save yourself $89 million between now and 2050. You're going to avoid $1 million in fines, and you're going to save 27,000 metric tons of carbon. It's an 80% improvement into that building for passive house, which is a consistent number. Us passive house practitioners, we look at that and we're like, that makes sense, 80%. No one ever did the life cycle analysis on this building to determine business as usual. I'm going to spend more money, 4.3% based on EIA, or I can go to that green line, which is my Enerfit, and I could put renewables on it and then just calculate the numbers, guys. That's the whole thing. It's like you're telling me all the negatives on that building, and I see triggers. I see opportunities to touch that building. And if we can only do a life cycle analysis on that building, we could start to identify where that value's at. Those are the opportunities that I think that we got to look at. You're not replacing in kind. You're building a better asset, and that asset has value. It has occupant benefit value. It has OpEx value, and we need to identify what that is if we're going to transform the thinking in the United States to better buildings, right? Who goes to the car dealership and says, I need a new car. I'm going to get a Yugo because code says I got to buy a Yugo. That's what we're doing with our buildings, right? Code represents the worst building we're legally allowed to build. No one's ever asking, what's the best building I can build, until you show them the value, and then they change their attitude.
Yeah, it's the owners that are the drawback here. Nobody's cash positive really, or some of them are, but nobody wants to spend the money.
And they don't believe that passive house is going to result in an effective change, right? That's
right.
The whole lead promise. You do this, you should get that. And we do it for 20 years and it doesn't happen. And we're saying, same lead building. I spent all this money on lead gold and lead platinum, and my building's performing the exact same. What I'm telling you is passive house is different. And until we get to a measurement and verification system that shows the building owners that they're extracting value, it's going to be challenging for us to scale passive house. That's why all of our work is devoted to measurement verification right now. The last administration valued carbon. We could do that math all day long. The current administration values costs. All they did is change the KPI. So again, if they value costs, we can show you costs. We'll show you the OpEx because the OpEx is going to pay on these buildings.
And then Mike, another reimaginer, asked Craig about the historic retrofit he's working on.
Hi, I'm Mike Dudek. I'm from Woodstock, Illinois. I'm actually about 75 miles northwest of Chicago. I work in the Rockford area. I'm an architect and construction manager, and I do big development commercial jobs. I'm doing a historic building that is on a river that is a newspaper building from 1929. You can't, on the historic buildings, you can't touch the outsides typically. It's all limestone. They never insulated those buildings back then. So I'm having a challenge of how do you deal with a building that's got plaster walls on the inside and limestone on the outside and no insulation. What is your best recommendation for wall section? Because I don't know what you did at your GSA project, but trying to get a thermal value. Now we have paneling actually that's historic on one floor that can't be removed either. That's another issue. So I don't want to trap any moisture in the building and destroy my wall.
Yeah, no, you're hitting a nail on the head. Now we've dealt with this. We've done projects in New York City with Heritage, and they have the same concerns. Not necessarily limestone like you have, but the GSA project we did was a limestone project. And your answer in short is going to be an inside out retrofit. That's your answer because you can't go outside in. So when you can't go outside in, no one's going to want to lose their limestone, right? They're going to want to maintain that limestone. So it sticks you into an outside in retrofit. And at that instance, what we would suggest is take a look and see if you have the opportunity for sidewalls, back walls, roof to make that transition from inside to outside, which makes life a lot easier. The GSA project we had no opportunity, but the benefit of the GSA project we had is it was a very big building. So the wall was less important in a big building. It's counterintuitive. A lot of people just don't see that and they think small is easy. We could do passive house for small all day long, but what they don't understand is because of your surface of wall to volume of air ratio, it makes that wall that much more important. So smaller projects end up being a little bit more challenging than the larger projects because I can stay closer to code-based walls in a larger project. But Michael, the answer to that is that when you have opaque and you have fenestration. When we were in New York City, they said we had heritage requirements to meet, which means frame, even the material. If it's a wood frame, it's got to stay a wood frame. It's got to stay with the muttons. If it's operable, it's got to stay operable. And we sat down with Heritage and had a nice long conversation, and Ed will be able to back me up on this. I'm sure he deals with this all the time. Is that, what we ended up doing is we were able to reproduce the frontage first level per Heritage. Frontage second level, we were able to eliminate operability. So then we can have a simulated double hung window up there, which you can buy a much more efficient window. And by the time we got to the sides and back, we could pretty much change even the material of the window itself. So I would recommend first sit down with the Heritage folks and talk to them. They understand that they're balancing energy efficiency, decarbonization with heritage. And they most likely will have solutions for you that would be reasonable that you can put in place. The challenges we also had at the GSA is we had plaster that was also heritage on the inside. So we had to figure out how to kind of manage that too, right? Because now all of a sudden I can't go outside, I can't go inside, I'm stuck. And then we had to work out those conditions. But because the building was so big, as long as we managed wall durability, we were able to modify that a little bit to our benefit. It will work, but it takes a lot more work to do it. But you're going to be stuck. I mean, you're going to be stuck with opaque and you're going to be stuck with fenestration. Sit down with Heritage first and foremost, find out what you can do. And there are windows. I'm sorry, one more point.
I'm sorry.
One more point. So I know Zack has these libraries. If you don't, reach out to us. We'll help you. It took us a while to research, but there are window manufacturers out there that will reproduce Heritage windows. Costs a little bit more, but they exist. Now, finding them isn't as easy as it's said, but I know the accelerator has a library of those. We have a library. We'll be able to help you guys with that if you need it.
Yeah, thanks for the reply. We already have all the window companies. We already have all the Heritage window companies. It's not an issue with us.
Good.
We actually put a brand new roof on as soon as we bought the building. There's 7 additions on this building, so it was all hodgepodge. So what we did is the first thing we did is tore everything off the roof and replaced the entire roof. And we bought 2 buildings. We've done that. First thing we do is put a brand new roof in because moisture will kill a building. And so we did that, put an R30, a TPO on it, at least got that far, because even the roofs didn't have hardly insulation in them. And so we removed all the old equipment over since 1929. They had dog houses, they had this, they had steam pipes, they had everything. We basically took everything off the roof that we could, and then so we could actually insulate the roof and just say, hey, you know what, we'll deal with, the air infiltration or the air handling later. And we did a separate DAWS unit. We have a full set of drawings done. And so we're 95% of the way there, but nobody came up with a really good wall section of how we actually can insulate, because we have a 9-story tower and it's just plaster, and you go behind that plaster and lath, you've got the back of a fire block, and then you got limestone, and that's it.
Yep. No, those are what we see all the time, but you're bringing up a really good point, Michael. And that point is that as a passive house modeler, we're playing with 8 dials, right? So you can add insulation into your roof and minimize some insulation in the wall. If you have the opportunity to do insulation in the slabs, it might also ease up some of those constraints on the walls. And I can also put in more efficient HVAC systems, which would then give me another way to play with that. So you have to, my opinion is, to do an existing retrofit is you have to know the answer before you start, right? I know where I'm at and I know what I want to go to. And then from there, develop your phase plan on how you get there. Because if you replace that roof and you did it with an R30 thinking, R30 should get me there, and I'm not suggesting you did, I'm just suggesting a lot of people do that. And then we come on board and said, listen, if we would have went to an R30, then I could have taken my walls from an R22 to an R20 or an R18, right? And that's the games we play with those 8 dials. So do the plan before you do anything, understand where it is you want to go, and then it's just a matter of execution. And if I can play with those dials, now I can still make those decisions. But once you replace that roof, you've immunized that roof. We're done. We don't touch that roof until it expires again. That's the same thing with all those decisions. So when we work with architects, and we work with them all the time, it's like they think, and no disrespect to architects, and I see about 4 or 5 of them on the phone here, is they think that, historically, how do we design buildings? Well, we go out there and we're going to do our SD. We're probably going to get deep into DD before we even call the MEP, right? Then the MEP says, listen, just tell me the wall boundaries and I'll design you an HVAC system. I've been doing it for 5,000 years and I know how to do this. And we look at them and we say, well, wait a second. If you want to go to passive house, you just changed your walls, assuming you're in the northeast part of the United States, from an R18 to an R30, right? That's 10 inches to 20 inches. So where's that going to come from? You're probably already boundary limited, so you're making me come inside. So now all your hallways, all your bubble layouts for all your square foots for your tenants, your bathrooms for ADA, all those now have to be disrupted because you brought me in DD and you didn't bring me in early. So if we get in there early, what we end up doing is we define what those targeted R values and U values are for your 6 sides of the cube. And at that point in time, now the architects can finish their design and get the building laid out properly, and they don't have to worry about us kicking over all the chairs on the Titanic, right? We need to make sure that we're all working together. So there's this McLeamy curve, and Bo and I have talked about this a lot, the McLeamy curve, right? The cost of money is cheapest early. Make those decisions before we start papering this stuff up and start building it, because as soon as I do it, those decisions become way, way more expensive. So hopefully, Michael, I was able to give you some insight here, but it's doable. What you're doing is definitely doable. There is a natural order to sustainability, and that's passive first, active second, and renewables last, right? I've been into so many OPRs and discovery charrettes where the first person to talk is the MEP and the second person to talk is my renewable strategy, my PV vendor. And I just look at these guys and I'm like, when are we going to talk about reducing loads here, guys, right? So the natural order sustainability is reduce your loads as aggressively as you possibly can first and foremost. It makes everything else easier. It removes the volatility from everything we're talking about. And passive house is the best way to do that. And then decouple your systems, active second, decouple your systems and look for the most efficient systems you can have. And it's not that we don't like renewables. We love renewables. We love offsetting, but I want my PV array to be this big and not this big. So do that last.
And last but not least, Lindsay Schack and Michael Ingui talk about bringing younger professionals into the Passive House movement.
So one of the things that I didn't actually get in my bio is I did join the Passive House Network board last year, and I'm focusing on their education committee. And so, because I would really like to see this education find its way into typical architectural, building science education, or, building science education for anybody who owns a home, would like to operate a home, like to have some level of that. Again, why I think the work that you guys are doing is really, really important, because a lot of us are looking for this kind of education already being practitioners.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I actually just spoke at my college on Friday. I was to tell them about some of the projects that I work on and so forth. And they had about 40 kids from a couple of the different classes, third-year architecture students. And I just kind of assumed that, that they knew enough about some high-performance building or some passive house, and they didn't. Or some did, but a lot of didn't. And they're just like, like really? And I'm like, yeah. And if you do that, you could do this. And so one of the things that we've already been doing on the accelerator, but I think we're going to be taking even more seriously is really getting the college students to start showing up to the events, working with the AIS and actually maybe either free or really cheap passes to some of the conferences. So we're going to try that out over the next, but they can't unlearn it. And all of a sudden, it was supposed to be an hour long or an hour and a half long session. I mean, I was there until like 1 o'clock. It killed my Friday. But it was kind of cool to see them all do it. And then you realize like they already know like Rhino, and they already knew programs that Ed's using. And I'm like, hey, by the way, but he's combining them. He's doing this. And I'm showing him on the accelerator. Not that I know how to do it. But I'm right there with you. Starting young is super important.
Well, I love how you said like they can't unlearn it, because I feel like that was so much my experience of learning to be more effective and gaining some level of confidence that I understood how this system worked. It gave me, I think, a tremendous amount of confidence just as an architect, because I think without the backing of building science, there's so much about architecture that feels so subjective. And it feels so much like, well, we can, like, because what architects do is that we like to debate about what's better, is it A or B, is it chocolate or vanilla? And like, we can have an argument for the rest of the day if we wanted to.
100%.
And that's all entertaining and everything, but are we making the profession any better? Are we doing anything better for our clients? And this feels like it, of course, it demonstrably does something that's more effective. And I think that's why I get so excited. And that's why I'm also been kind of like, we cannot be territorial about this. We need to give it away for free. We need to teach everyone who will listen. We need to teach young people so that they can bring it to their communities or start the process sooner. We just don't have time to be territorial about it. And it is complex enough that you can't phone it in.
On that note, I hope these snippets of our experts and residents in the Reimagine Buildings Collective have piqued your interest. You can dive into the full replays of these conversations, all available in the Reimagine Buildings Collective. If you're not yet a member of Reimagine Buildings, we'd love to have you join us. You'll get direct access to experts and peers who are on the same journey with buildings, resilience, and climate. Learn more at reimaginebuildings.com. With that, thanks for listening to this 15th episode of the Reimagine Edit, a production of the Passive House podcast by Passive House Accelerator. It's a privilege to share these conversations from the Reimagine Buildings Collective. None of this work happens in isolation. We're learning alongside one another, building as we go, and gradually finding clearer footing toward the future we're trying to create. So thanks for being part of this ongoing experiment in reimagining buildings. And if you're not yet part of the collective and you're curious, check it out. We'd love for you to join us. With that, have a great couple of weeks. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Reimagine Edit. Be well.